I'm an explorer at heart. I'm also, like all of you, a lover of horror. And in a country like the United States, where entire buildings and even towns end up abandoned, quenching both desires is a relatively easy task to accomplish if someone has the time. I currently live in Illinois and have explored many of its haunted places. I have even explored abandoned buildings that simply look creepy, even if there is no claim of any paranormal happenings. Needless to say, I have never really found much. Many of the places I explored, while interesting, were only creepy due to the fact that I was alone there, and not because anything scary happened. But a couple of weeks ago, I took some time off from work and decided to take a road trip to an abandoned town down in Alabama called Cahaba. I was looking up creepy places online when I came across this town. The United States has no shortage of ghost towns, but Cahaba stood out as, at one point in time, it was the first permanent capital of Alabama. Cahaba was not the normal ghost town story, and that piqued my interest. Apparently, due to a flood, the capital of Alabama was moved to Selma, which, while no longer being the capital, is still a relatively populated city. Now, people can freely visit the site, both during the day and at night, but I had a plan to go around 2 in the morning during the middle of the week during the spring, hoping that I would end up being alone there and be able to explore freely and without interruption. I packed the essentials: some food, water, my phone for camera and video, and a physical notebook to write down everything. Before anyone says anything, I didn't take any ghost hunting equipment because I honestly don't believe that equipment works. People see and hear what they want, making it all pretty much useless in my humble opinion. I arrived in Beloit, a town in Alabama about 10 minutes away from Cahaba. I checked into the hotel, tired and deciding to scope out the area for the best way in during the day. I needed a way to get into the place itself without being noticed, not because I was concerned about getting in trouble. I don't think I would, but as I said, I wanted to be left alone. And even during the day, the abandoned town was quite the sight to take in. There were old, collapsing houses spread out all over. The cemetery even managed to hold a sense of unease during the broad daylight. And seeing the old government buildings, what's left of them at least, is quite the sight to behold. I found what looked like a deer trail about 2 miles into Cahaba. I followed the trail until I came out on a small dirt road off a slightly larger gravel road that connected to the nearby highway. I hiked back to my car and drove back to Beloit for lunch before heading back to the hotel for a nap. I woke up about 3 hours later and checked the clock. It was about 9 at night. I showered and picked up everything I needed before leaving the hotel again. I stopped and ate a very light supper before heading back towards Cahaba. I carefully drove onto the gravel road and even more carefully drove over the whole-field dirt road. I parked and shut off the engine, checking the time as I stepped out of my car. It was exactly a minute until midnight. Nearly perfect. I grabbed my pack out of the trunk, swung it over my shoulder, and turned on my flashlight. And then I walked along the deer trail I had found earlier. Getting back into the area was not as easy at night as it was during the day. When people think of trails, they think of relatively clear paths that you can easily follow. Deer trails are nothing like that. They can be very faint and can go 100 different ways. I have a fairly good memory, and thanks to blind luck, I managed to make my way back to the town with only a few unneeded detours. I decided to check out the very first house I came to, one that was nearly falling down, but it looked sturdy enough to not fall on my head. It was not too far into the town. I came upon it not too long after entering the town itself. I carefully made my way inside and was surprised to discover a relatively new furniture. It was weird, but maybe the people who took care of what remained of the town had a sense of humor. I shook my head and walked further into the house. Nothing of interest showing up other than more new furniture. I chuckled, not even because I found it funny, but because it struck me as hilarious that a group of people were so committed as to fill a nearly collapsed house full of new furniture. After not finding anything of note, I made my way out of the house only to see that the woods had changed slightly. They had become less dense, and it seemed as though the dead trees now outnumbered the live ones, which I swear was not the case when I originally came in during the day. Something else caught my eye as well. There was a house not too far from where I stood that looked brand new. At the time, I told myself that the house was possibly a groundskeeper's house, Or maybe the house of the head of security. The lights were on and I wanted to avoid any trouble. So I thought I would go up and knock and inform whoever was there that I was out ghost hunting. I didn't want to end up shot after all, it was Alabama. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. It swung open. Now this sounds like a horror movie trope, right? And that's exactly what I thought when it happened, which is why I ignored it and simply assumed that the person forgot to lock their door. Living in the middle of nowhere myself, I know it's quite easy to do. Sometimes I even do it on purpose. I called out that I had knocked and that the door had opened and that I simply wanted to talk with whoever lived here. I waited about 5 minutes and got no answer. I sighed and decided to go further into the woods to avoid meeting the owner and scaring them. I turned around and my mouth fell open. Right where the porch ended, there was nothing but blackness, where the forest had just been. I slowly made my way down the steps of the porch and carefully touched the void with the tip of my shoe. I felt a shock like an electric current from a live power cable go through my body, causing me to cry out in pain and to collapse. Luckily, I was able to hold on to the railing next to the steps and keep my entire body from sliding into the void. I'm not sure how long I laid there on the steps, but eventually the pain dulled and I managed to stand up and make my way back to the porch itself. Scared and confused and wanting to get away from that void as much as possible, I simply opened the door into the house and walked in. I closed the door behind me and called out for whoever owned the house once more. After again getting no answer, I made my way around the small house, checking every room and even the closet, and finally came to the conclusion that no one was in the house. I was the only one there. I looked out a window in the kitchen overlooking the space behind the house, only to see that the void had closed in up to the back porch there as well. I started to feel panic well up inside me, and unsure of what to do next, I simply froze, standing as still as a statue and not making a sound. Then I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned around to see an older man standing in the doorway, giving me a stony look that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. "What are you doing here?" the old man asked as he walked towards the kitchen table and sat down. I struggled for about 5 minutes to speak before finally being able to utter a word in response. His expression didn't change the entire time. I was going to explore the old town. I was ghost hunting. I saw your house and thought that you might be a guard or groundskeeper. I wanted to tell you I was out exploring so I didn't end up being shot. I never would have come if it wasn't for that. What is it outside? The man surprised me by letting out a laugh, which is very far from the usual response when it comes to breaking and entering, even if I only really committed the latter. "I'm sure I don't need to tell you this. There's a reason no one comes this deep into the town after dark. When you said I may be a guard or a groundskeeper, you weren't completely wrong. I'm a little bit of both. I'm out here to watch the void and keep people out. I guess I slacked off because I have never had anyone actually attempt to stay long enough to be caught up in the void. You're lucky that you came in when you did. For some reason, this plot of land is left alone. Even before this house was built, the void let it be." I tried to wrap my head around everything that was going on. The void, the safe house, this guy talking about the void like it's simply another caretaker job. This wasn't setting well with me at all, and every time I glanced out the window, I wanted to panic and scream. Instead, I pulled out a chair and sat down. "Look, sir," I began. "Call me Jeff." Look, Jeff, if I had known about any of this, I would have let it be. I would have never come here. I simply saw this place on the internet and took some time off from work and came here to explore. There has to be a way out. It will disappear in the morning, right? That's why no one else has seen it." I could hear the panic in my own voice, but at that point, I didn't really care if Jeff heard it or not. Jeff sighed and gave me a look of pity. "Boy, I wish I could give you that simple of an answer. The truth is, this place doesn't technically exist. At least not completely. The main reason no one has ever seen it is because once the void takes over, The part of town that existed within it ceases to exist for varying lengths of time. It will be morning when we can finally go, but it may be a morning 2 weeks from when you got here, or 2 months, or even 2 years, or it could only be a day. But until then, you're stuck here. I grew pale. I felt like I was going to puke. I could be stuck here for years. My family is going to think I died. My thoughts raced as I flicked my gaze back and forth between Jeff and the void outside the kitchen window. "What role do you play in this?" I asked in a hoarse whisper. Jeff seemed to stop and think about it for a second, unsure of how to answer. Or maybe he was simply finding a way to make his explanation make sense to someone who, up until a few minutes ago, didn't even know that all of this existed. "I don't remember really being born or even existing outside of this house. The reason you didn't see me before is because I technically wasn't here. I appear and disappear along with the house, though the house itself typically precedes me. The fact that you got caught in this greatly disturbs me, however. I can't say for sure that this place has a mind of its own, but you are the first person to ever end up here. I have many theories on this place myself. The one I have the most proof for is that the void itself is simply a box, and that the house itself is basically a micro-universe that just happens to appear and disappear at will." I spent a few minutes trying to process everything I was just told, trying to wrap my head around what he had just said. "So what you're telling me is that this house exists in its own universe or some kind of extra dimension? How does that work though? Why do I still see myself as a normal human being? Why do you still look like a normal human being? What does the house want with me? What?" Jeff interrupted my stream of questions. "Look, boy, I'm no scientist. I don't know. I only know what I have seen being with this house. I don't even know how long I have been here or if I had a life beforehand. I don't know why you are here or why the house decided to make you stay. If I had the answers, I would tell you. But I don't have answers. Not for myself, and not for..." Suddenly, Jeff was cut off. He opened his mouth a couple of times, but no sound came out. He looked at me with surprise before falling face down onto the kitchen floor, a sharp piece of what seemed to be solid void sticking out of his back. I quickly backpedaled until I hit the wall, sliding down it as I stared at Jeff's corpse. The corpse slowly turned black, black like the void, and that blackness started to slowly spread across the kitchen floor. The void was taking over. Slowly but surely, the void was going to engulf the house, engulf the last safe haven within it. I glanced around, terrified and frozen in fear. The void creeping through the kitchen in every direction. I knew that if I couldn't stay away from it, it would kill me. A few seconds had nearly knocked me unconscious from the pain. It likely wouldn't take much longer than a few minutes for it to cause more permanent damage. The blackness had finally gotten about an inch away from my feet before I unfroze and quickly stood up, sliding against the wall and around the doorway onto the front room where I had originally come in. I glanced out the door at a small, narrow, voidless path that led to who knows where. I looked back and saw the blackness of the void creeping into the living room, clearly moving faster the more it spread out. I threw open the door and ran out, following the path straight forward, terrified that the void would suddenly close in on me. I finally spilled out into the park itself, tripping over a fallen log and falling face first into the dirt. I scrambled to my feet and turned around, watching the path close up. There was basically a large box the size of a mansion of nothing but blackness, of nothing but that void. As soon as it closed up, it suddenly blinked away, like an old cathode tube television turning off. I didn't stick around. I ran, desperately searching for the trail that would lead me back to my car so that I could get away from this place. After what seemed like hours, I finally made my way to my car, panting heavily and fighting back the need to scream. I got in and I just sat there, catching my breath and trying to calm myself enough to drive. After doing so, I made my way back to the hotel I was staying in and collapsed onto the bed. I didn't think I would be able to sleep, but I was out like a light after only a few minutes of laying down. I woke up the next day around 2 in the afternoon. As soon as I awoke, The night's events came flooding back to me, and I suddenly felt terrified all over again. I reminded myself that I was safely away from that spot and that I had watched the void itself disappear. I still felt uneasy though. Despite my mind's protest, I decided I needed to go back during the day and check to be sure that everything was back to normal. I went to grab my backpack before realizing that I had left it inside the house. In fact, I had left everything I had taken with me in that house. I shrugged and decided I needed to go back anyway. I grabbed what I had left, handed the keys to the front desk clerk at the hotel, and drove back to Cahaba. I originally thought about going through the normal entrance, but decided that I could get back to where I was faster if I went through the trail that I had used the night before. I pulled my car over on the same stretch of dirt road. I found the deer trail and made my way back through the forest, passing the dilapidated house from before. I quickly peeked inside and saw that all of the formerly new-looking furniture was gone. While I am unsure of how this is connected, I am sure it had to have been connected to the void somehow. After about an hour of walking, I finally got back to the part of the forest I was sure the house in the void had been in before. I looked around and walked around where the house had been standing. Nothing but a concrete base now stood, and the void appeared to be gone. Taking a closer look, however, I saw that the void was not completely gone. I knelt down and took a closer look. A small, swirling black hole was dead center in the concrete base. I gently touched it and pulled my hand back with a yelp as I felt a shock run through my entire body.